Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to a brand new movie review. I'm Chris Garner, joined today with Tayte in the Hour to give our review on The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I've just noticed that the cameras aren't switching between each other, so Tayte, you might have to man that manually as each of us are talking from your end.
What was that?
The cameras aren't switching between us on the stream. You know how it automatically does, so you
Oh,
might have to like keep clicking.
okay, that's fine. I'll keep on the clicking then. I'll make sure that we stay with that. Although I'm not sure if I actually have the power to do that. We'll just see what happens. Is it just permanently stuck on me at the moment?
Anyway, yes. So, as I said, we're reviewing The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which is the Coen brothers' written, directed, and produced American Western anthology film. We don't really get many of those now. We don't really get many Westerns, let alone anthology movies. This did get a limited theatrical release, but however, it's on Netflix now as of November 16th. So this is readily available to anyone that has Netflix. And I actually watched this morning. We were originally going to go with a solo review. I was going to jump on, Tayte, you were going to talk about it. And then I watched the trailer this morning, and I'm in kind of a bit of a Red Dead Redemption 2 vibe at the moment. Very much wrapped up into the Western surroundings and setting. And I saw that trailer, I was like, I need to jump on this review as well. So I watched it this morning, and here we are right now.
I have to say, they perfectly timed the release of this. Like, I don't think there's been a more kind of perfect release other than if there was like a Spider-Man film released at the same time as the game of that sort. But honestly, like, you have the biggest game of the year, or at least one of the biggest games of the year released, which has everyone kind of getting back into Westerns and getting back into that gunslinger kind of mentality. Then you have this film, which is basically 6 short stories, which is all about the Old West and all about the different areas that they do that, with the kings of the Westerns, the Coen brothers, doing it. It's brilliant. It's absolutely amazing. Like, I'm happy.
What more do you want? And yeah, I mean, as anthology suggests, like, these are 6 in varying lengths. There's one episode certainly that we'll talk about that is much longer. It almost feels like a little mini feature film in itself.
Yeah.
6 individual vignettes, unconnected short stories all around the Western setting, with different, obviously different stories. Most of them are bittersweet, but there are some that are more lighthearted, and we'll talk about those in the spoiler section. Our review is very much going to be in similar fashion to the actual film itself, apart from a spoiler-free section at the beginning. Once we've got the spoiler-free section out of the way, which is mostly going to be our overall opinions, which episodes that we liked, without going too much in depth, we are going to get into each individual episode. We are going to talk about each of the 6 short stories in depth individually, and that'll be our spoiler section. So, how did you hear about this thing, Tayte? Because I heard no word of this.
I saw the trailer ages ago. So when the first trailer got released, I heard that the Coen brothers were doing a Netflix film. It was going to be a Western. I didn't realize it was going to be an anthology film until I think it was a week maybe before I actually saw it being released. And then Netflix actually started putting up, like, here's the final trailer for it. Like, we're going to release it pretty soon. So I've been on board with it for about 4 or 5 months now, or whenever they announced it for the first time. But I saw the cast that they had with it. I think they originally kind of just put up that James Franco was going to be in it. They said Liam Neeson was going to be in it, and then they slowly started to leak more people, like what's his name, Tim Blake Nelson, and people like Tom Waits. So they started to kind of collect together this amazing cast, and it kind of blossomed into, well, they kind of let everyone know, oh, it's an anthology story. It's going to be 6 unique stories which are separate of each other, which are all about tales of the Old West. And when I kind of thought about it first, I thought, okay, I'm really into my anthology stories. I absolutely love Black Mirror on Netflix, and I know that Netflix is able to handle anthology stories in that way. But I did have a little bit of doubt in my mind whether the Coen brothers would be able to get their story told within the time limit. Because from watching previous Coen brothers films, one thing that they are very good at is stretching the story out and having very nice little character moments and having the character develop throughout the film, where the character will feel underdeveloped at the start, but will feel almost overdeveloped at the end. You know way too much about them by the end of the course, and you get almost too attached to the character. But I'd say, without spoiling anything, they managed to balance it in every single story very well. They keep their unique charm that they bring to the table. Every story feels like a Western story. Every story also could have easily been extended into a full feature-length film, maybe apart from one of the stories. You could have really run with it if you wanted to, and have these kind of individual Western adventures, which are very well told, very well acted, very beautifully shot in some places as well. So really, it's a brilliant kind of film to come out this year, which, like, personally for me, it's up there. It's definitely up there.
Certainly after watching this now, we did have a little bit of a debate between me and you for when it comes to our top films of the year, whether we shall include Netflix movies. But I mean, this did technically get a limited theatrical release. Therefore, it well and truly counts as a theatrical movie for 2018. So I guess I'll allow it. I guess I need to talk about my my history sort of with the Coen brothers and their films.
You're going to sound like Anglo Globogian from Always Sunny.
Yeah. Bullshit, derivative. Very much so. Contrary to popular opinion, I really dislike most of the Coen brothers films. I know that many of them feature prominently on lists of greatest films of all time and everything like that, but every one I've seen, I've probably gone in with that pretense and I've seen it, and I just don't see. It's like with Wes Anderson movies, I just don't see what everyone else seems to see with their films. Nothing against them as filmmakers, as writers, or anything like that. They just never connected with me. So I think one of the reasons I was apprehensive to watch this thing was because of their attachment. And usually I can predict that, yes, in a Coen brothers movie, you're going to get one or a couple of good performances in there, but the film itself, I don't really care for. However, watching the trailer this morning, I was instantly won over by it. Like you, I love anthology films as well. I think it's a very good idea when done well. All the stories don't necessarily have to be connected. Some anthology films have a loose thread that connects them, whether it's a main narrative introduced at the very beginning of the film, which then they break up the stories with. This goes from story to story. Really, the only thing that links them is that it's presented in an old style hardback book called The Ballad of Buster Scruggs and Other Tales of the American Frontier. I thought that was a really nice touch where you get like the page numbers, the contents, the color illustrations. It just really gave it that authenticity, which I really appreciated.
I want to buy this book.
I'd love to buy this. If it only had 6 stories on the chapters, or if they on the page and it had more listed. But yeah, no, I mean, I'd love to see the Coen brothers do a sequel to this. I don't think they believe in doing sequels, but I think the sky's the limit.
I honestly think, they've managed to come up with something here where they could go on and do more of it. And the stories don't cover every single element that you could have with Western stories. To very simply break them down, you've got one which is about like a gunslinging cowboy. You've got one about a bank robber. You've got one about an entertainer. You've got one about a prospector. You've got one about the Oregon Trail. And the last one is just a stagecoach troupe, basically, a group of people in a stagecoach. So it doesn't cover every element of the West. It does cover a large scale of the West and covers kind of a lot of events that happened during the Western times that could be seen as not quite fact, but definitely close to some events that did happen. There was obvious influence in them, in their stories.
It definitely signifies.
Yeah, go on.
And it has your slow walk into a saloon. It has your gunslinging. It has your standoffs. It has, as we said, like the Manifest Destiny, the Oregon Trail. It has everything you come to expect from watching a Western film or a Western series, whatever it happens to be. But they are done in very unique ways. And I think that inherently, and as you said, like I think it won an award, the Golden Award for Best Screenplay. The screenplay and characterization is really what makes this film, in my opinion. I mean, I love Westerns in general, but it's certainly the characters and the uniqueness of the writing. And I think you've said as well, and I will agree with this, that the Coen brothers' strengths are in their writing of characters. They can immediately let you know what a character is like from the first couple of dialogue. And I think that episode 6 of this particular film symbolizes that completely, but we'll get to that in spoilers when we talk more about that. We're going to go with general opinions on this one, and it's very difficult because obviously the little stories in it are very unique to themselves. But what were your initial opinions on this film? And this is the second time that you've seen it as well. As of today, you were watching it at the same time as me. Did your opinion change on it, or was anything influenced greater the second time?
So I won't be kind of coy here. I absolutely loved the film on the first watch. It was fantastic. I loved the stories that they told. There was some which I liked more than others, but overall, kind of, it was one of those fun films that I thought, wow, I was really entertained by every single element of it. On second watching, I definitely, some of the ones which I didn't like as much, so I mean, I still liked them, but some of the ones which I would have rated lower started to go further up the list, and ones where there's a little bit kind of more to them. You can kind of delve deeper into them. You notice a few more things. It was very clear from the first watching that I definitely had one favorite tale from it, and that did stay the same in the second one. And personally, for me, I would love to just watch that one bit on repeat, but all the stories do come together very well, and I really enjoyed the entire scope of the film.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I was right there with you. I've only seen it one time. I absolutely love this movie. True, some stories definitely are better than other ones, but you almost have to rate them individually on each little movie. But even together, it was a great watch. As I said, I love Western films, and it really felt like a unique experience. Although there are very similar qualities to other things you've seen, I think the writing and the stories themselves were put across in a very unique and individual way, and that's really what kept me entertained. There is a dark sense of comedy to them, I think, in many of them.
That is the Coen brothers, just through and through. That is completely.
Whether it's throwaway lines, and don't get me wrong, there is violence in this film that is very stark and gritty, but then there's also violence that's very slapstick and comedic, almost like a Tarantino movie.
Yeah.
So it really does run the gamut in terms of its tone, but it all meshes together very well. I will say that I think tonally, the film starts off as very light-hearted, almost very cartoony, and then more realistic as the episodes go on, I would say. Probably peaking around episode 5, certainly. The one criticism I want to bring up with this film, and it's a very slight one, it didn't detract too much, but I would have appreciated if it was in perhaps a different medium. I was just reading about it here that The Ballad of Buster Scruggs is actually the Coen brothers' first film to ever be shot digitally. Apparently the film had around 800 visual effects, and especially with the magic hour, quote unquote, shots throughout the movie with the cinematography, they thought it would be a good opportunity to experiment with the medium of digital filmmaking. I'm not opposed to digital filmmaking inherently, but I think there are certain genres and certain types of film that definitely do lend themselves better to actual film, and I think genre is absolutely testament to that. The grain, the scope of the lens as well, and everything like that. I think that, and with the violence as well, a lot of the blood in this thing, not all of it, but most of it is digital blood, CGI blood, and it just never meshed well. It felt more like Once Upon a Time in the West, when it could have felt much more like the Sergio Leone films. You know what I mean? Very slight. The film's still very entertaining, but just from a visual standpoint, that did kind of rub me up the wrong way a little bit.
That's fair enough. I tended to not kind of notice that. It did have kind of a clean look to it, and some of the stories did have I'll say, dirtier look to it. Or at least I kind of noticed it as being a little bit grittier and a little bit kind of hard West, if we would say it that way. But I was so kind of enthralled and focused on the storytelling that the Coen brothers were doing here, and the characters they brought up and the stories that they had there, that I didn't mind that kind of elements of almost wackiness with some of the visual effects. Especially in the first story, there was a lot of wacky visual effects in the first story. But yeah, I guess we've reached a part where we say whether we'd recommend it or not.
I mean, I'd absolutely recommend this movie. This is coming from a person who wasn't even inherently a fan of the Coen brothers. This is without a doubt my favorite film they've done. I will be watching another one for our upcoming episode of Film Club this week. So who knows, that could all change. I thought it was a riveting watch. Even if you don't like all of the stories, there's enough in the stories that are good. I think there's something for everyone, ultimately, with this. Especially if you've been playing Red Dead Redemption, I think you're going to love this movie as well. It's a very, very good couple of months for the Western genre. It's making a little bit of a comeback. Yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised by it. The best thing is as well now, and Netflix are so good with this as well. It's readily available to watch on there. Like,
yeah,
if you have a Netflix account already, I believe they still do some kind of 30-day free trial or something like that. I don't know if they still do. We're not endorsed by Netflix, by the way, guys.
No, we're definitely not endorsed by Netflix.
Like that.
It would be amazing if we were, but no, sadly we are not.
So yeah, I mean, it is easily available to watch, and you know, Netflix has some great content on there. But give this a watch; you might be surprised by it. I definitely recommend it.
I'm not surprised. This was a Coen Brothers film. They make good films, Chris. Believe it or not. Okay,
for me, where I'm going to acknowledge that the Coen brothers are great and appreciate all of their movies.
Well, this week you're watching Oh Brother Where Art Thou, which I would put up there as probably my favorite Coen brothers film. However, I really enjoyed this film as well, and I feel like maybe watching Oh Brother Where Art Thou, I'll be able to decide which one I preferred out of the two of them. This film is fantastic from start to finish. It's completely enthralling. There isn't really much more I can say other than go watch it. Like borrow your parents' Netflix password or your roommate's Netflix password, or if you have a Netflix account as well, why haven't you seen it yet? Go watch it, and if you have seen it, then join us on for our spoiler part, which is going to start right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is your final warning. If you haven't seen The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, if you've never heard of it and are remotely anywhere curious, judging from our review so far, please go and watch it. Please support it, and then come back to our review where we are now going to go through all of the 6 episodes individually, starting with the title of the film itself, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which is story number 1.
Yes.
It is starring Tim Blake Nelson, who's one of those character actors that's always great. Everything I see him in, whether it's Holes. I even liked him in the Incredible Hulk movie. He was in that film with Edward Norton, making sure I get the right name there.
Yeah.
He's just great, and we're going to rank all the episodes at the very end of this review. But this might be my favorite. This was certainly the most entertaining. I don't think there's enough to deconstruct in this one or come up with as many. There's not as much in there. It is pretty much A to B of a story. It was almost Blazing Saddles with a lot more violence.
Oh my god. So it is kind of a comedy 4/4 breaking Western sing-along kind of journeyman's tale of Buster Scruggs, the misanthrope, who is riding through the valley on his trusty steed, finds a bar who won't serve him, so he kills everyone inside. Goes to town, wants to join a game of poker, and he doesn't want to use the cards on the table, even though they're good cards. I'm assuming that's kind of a power play on his part. But you're left with him making probably the most inventive kill I've seen in a Western film, using the table to...
There were so many bits in this that were absolutely brutal. As I said, we were watching this together, and we were kind of having a running commentary together with our Facebook. Yeah. And there were just moments where I was like, "Oh, that just happened."
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen violence in films, but this was done, especially in this episode, was done very comedically, and I loved it.
This was Tarantino levels of violence, I'd say.
Yeah,
and that cartoonish over the topness.
Yes, and I mean, it's listed here as Curly Joe, but I believe it's pronounced Surly Joe because it's got the C with a little underneath it. But seeing Clancy Brown in this film was great. I love Clancy Brown, even though he's not in the film for very long.
What was it? You've seen him, you play him.
And I think out of all the episodes, this one perhaps had the most visually interesting stuff in terms of the special effects. I love when Buster Scruggs walks into the saloon covered in dust from his travels and kind of taps his clothes and it leaves like a little ghost outline. I love stuff like that. The gunplay was great. And although it is kind of a sad ending to the film, it is done very tongue-in-cheek. The fact that a new singer approaches on the scene at the end who's an even faster gunsmith. And that theme very much carries on throughout the rest of the films in that this is really a land with no law, no justice, pure bad luck, and people getting an opportunity on other people. And that kind of sets the tone going into the other episodes.
Yeah, it is very clear that that Buster Scruggs did not go to the Thanos school of aiming for the head, as he does like to almost toy with his victims. The first one being him just kind of letting him, there you go, I got the door for you. And then you've got the blowing off the fingers and then shooting him backwards, which was quite funny as well.
And there is a moment at the end where you think that the bullet hasn't gone into him, like you think it's gone through his hat, and then he's going to pull out the gun and he's going to sing a song into the sunset. Sadly, that isn't this ending at all.
And yeah, I think the actual visual stylings of that, of him kind of taking his hat down, and then looking in the mirror, and then going, that ain't good, and then just falling back. Very well done. And then the poignant song to end, that he's going to trade his spurs for wings. Every
exploration in this episode as well, the fact that you've got Tim Blake Nelson kind of addressing the viewer directly into the camera. That's the only, I believe that's the only the story that does that in this.
I think they wanted to make every single story so different. And I think the character of Buster Scruggs that they kind of had here was the kind of character who would talk to himself, and therefore the only other person who he talked to would be the camera. So it made sense that there was that kind of audience interaction with him, as it kind of added to the comedy of it, added to the actual storytelling there, as it being probably, other than maybe the All Gold Mountain one, it's the only one where there's only really one person to interact with throughout the story. But I'll say this now, the All Gold Mountain one, it wouldn't have made sense if he was breaking the fourth wall, talking to the camera.
Definitely. And it was definitely right having position in this story at the beginning of the film. Although the tone doesn't usually carry over in many of the other episodes, I think that it would have definitely changed the movie had you have put this one, say, after story number 3, Meal Ticket.
Yeah.
At the very end, I think that would have, can you imagine? Like, it may have alleviated some of the tension and everything like that, but I think it would have done a disservice to that previous episode and indeed the further stories as well.
This episode would have worked at first or last, but with the 4-4 breaking, it probably wouldn't have worked best at last. And yeah, it kind of introduced you.
Oh, have we lost Tayte?
Yeah, have we lost Tayte? We have not lost Tayte.
He's back.
We have not lost Tayte, Chris. But anyway, should we move on to near Algodones?
Yes, Algodones. I can't remember how to pronounce it. We're going to go with Algodones.
They didn't actually say it in the film. And this is probably the most unusual title because it doesn't really kind of explain what happens. It just kind of it puts the setting there.
Yes, this is the James Franco-centric episode where we're introduced to sort of a man with no name kind of character, a lone gunman who's attempting to rob a bank. The plan goes awry and then he ends up being hung, is about to be executed, makes an escape, but then sadly his fate comes back to bite him after that, where he gets hung again, this time for good, and that's the end of the episode. That's essentially the plot in a nutshell. Again, very much like episode 1, there isn't much to really read into this episode. We're certainly going to get to that in episode 3 with Meal Ticket. I enjoyed this one. It's probably going to be ranked very low in terms of my favorites, in that there just really isn't much to talk about it. James Franco's great in it, and there are some funny moments, but I didn't really connect with this one as much. There is a kind of Good, the Bad, and the Ugly style moment where he is almost being hung and someone has to try and shoot the rope. Definitely reminded me of that movie. I can't remember if in that movie, I think it's the character of Tuco that's about to be hung. I can't remember if he is on a horse or if he's just standing up or something. I can't remember. But what did you think of this episode? It did give us pan shot though, which was the best.
Yes, it did give us pan shots. This is the shortest of all the episodes. It's a very quick tale, but it does a lot of storytelling with that. You get the sense of desperateness to James Franco's Desperado. You also get kind of, you see him in many different states. So you see him at the very start where he's very kind of bleak and kind of wants the job done. You have the pan shot moment, which might be the best moment in the film. It's excellent with the character of, let me get his name, the character of the teller, Stephen Root's teller, who goes and runs at him with pans as kind of like a bulletproof vest made of pans.
He's almost like an Old West version of RoboCop, and I'm just shouting at the screen like, just shoot for his face. Just shoot him in the face and all this will be over.
like, I'm not gonna lie, that might be my Halloween costume for next year. It would be amazing.
That would be a very deep cut of a Halloween costume, Tayte.
You then have him with the hanging scene and the sentencing scene and the Indian tribe that comes over and attacks him. You've then got him being saved only to be taken back to sentencing. And the ending that we're left with, sure, there's a joke towards the end, which was like the first time joke, which I saw from the trailer, which it's still landed. It's still a funny joke. But the one thing that stuck with me the most from this one was James Franco waiting for his bag to be put on his head, and he catches the eye of the young pretty girl in the crowd. And he kind of makes comment on it. He says, well, ain't that a pretty thing? And then the bag goes over his head to close the story. It kind of has that almost sense of thinking maybe it would have been different in another life. Maybe if he wasn't caught on that second occasion, he would have been to that town and he would have been able to survive.
In that moment, he's focusing on the most beautiful thing that he sees right before the moment of death, which is, I mean, you kind of have the thing like seeing your whole life before your eyes, but and people say like it's beautiful or something like that, or praying to have moments like that. I took it as that in those scant few seconds that he had left, he chooses to focus on the one like radiant, beautiful thing that he can see. But ultimately he can't escape his fate, no matter how. There is that moment where you think it's going to be like, oh, he's going to get away with it, he's going to eventually rob the bank or something like that, but ultimately this is the Wild West. Like, you can't outrun your fate no matter what you do. And he did play with like expectations and stuff like that. As I said, going back to things like Good, the Bad, the Ugly, where there are moments where people are saved from execution at the last moment. You don't get that in this particular story. I think that's really all that we can say for Near Algodones. I think this is the main one that we really want to talk about. This was your favorite episode. You warned me that this was the best one. And in terms of a filmmaking perspective and everything like that, in terms of its storytelling and the way it tells its story, I definitely think that it is the best one. However, it is also the most depressing story out of them all. This is Meal Ticket, starring Liam Neeson and I can't remember the name of the actor.
Harry Melling.
Yeah, that's it. Who plays Dudley in the Harry Potter films. I'm going to let you take the round on this one at the moment.
This is a Black Mirror episode. This is a Black Mirror episode set in the Old West. So we open with what is a very cold opening where Liam Neeson is setting up for a show. You have the entertainer come up on stage, played by Harry Melling, who has no arms and no legs, but is a brilliant orator. He's a brilliant speaker, and he talks about, he does Shakespeare, he does Bible readings, he does the Gettysburg Address, he does Shelley's Ozymandias. So you're left with him speaking out all of these amazing kind of speeches with a captivated crowd in the first sense, in this, what seems like quite low-lying, not quite in the mountains town for the first part. You see him collecting the money at the end, Liam Neeson, who looks after him, who goes around and collects all the money in, which ends up feeding their meal for the evening. You then see them go out into further and further kind of remote mountain towns and mountain places. And you're kind of left with a feeling of less and less people being interested in this kind of one thing. Suddenly, in the most remote of mountain towns, Liam Neeson, he doesn't want to be lonely or left alone with his companion, so he goes off to a brothel to just kind of clench that loneliness, kind of feel loved in some way, shape, or form for a second. Finally, they're left with 3 people watching one of their shows, and Liam Neeson is packing up, and what does he see? He sees a crowd gathering. What is the crowd gathering around? Where are all of his patrons, the people who should be seeing his show? What are they all doing? They are watching a chicken doing maths. Basically, a chicken who is able to peck on different spoons with numbers painted on them to do maths. And something so kind of trivial and something that isn't very high class and high standard, very high brow.
That's the thing. Like, obviously the chicken can't do maths. It's clearly someone behind the scenes, but even that fools the showman. And he is more willing to buy that chicken and make that his new attraction than an actual living person.
It's devastating, and the way the episode then plays out is he buys the chicken, and then he decides that it's only worth feeding one entertainer, and the episode is left with him chucking a stone off the bridge to test the waters, and then walking back over to the cart smiling. And oh boy, it is a purely, completely phenomenal storytelling.
We could probably talk about an hour on this one particular story alone, because it is so dense and there is so much that we can talk about it in terms of the subtext. For example, the ultimate end of the film, where it's implied that obviously he's been dropped into the river and Liam Neeson carries on with his new stage act that is the chicken. Apparently, this was foreshadowed earlier in the film, because the character without the arms and legs, I try to find his name, Harrison, I think the character's called. He quoted a line from Shakespeare from The Merchant of Venice, which is captioned, apparently, this is according to Wikipedia, on the colour plate illustration, which says, "The quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven." So, I mean, that was very subtly set up, right?
Yeah. For me, the best part of this episode is the communication between Liam Neeson's character and Haley Melling's character. They don't speak a single word to each other during the film. Not one face-to-face communication. But you see this kind of, you think it's a friendship to start off with. You think it's a caring, kind of loving friendship that they're kind of sticking together through thick and thin. But you slowly realize that it isn't a friendship. It's purely business. And when business dries up, you can see the frustrations coming forward from both of them. Harry Melling, like, we saw him in Harry Potter. Dudley wasn't exactly the best acted character. This performance is amazing. This is pure talent, just through facial expressions alone. His reading was very well done as well. The face tells many stories, especially throughout this tale. And both actors did an excellent job of kind of portraying that relationship between each other. With so little words said at all. It tells so much during this story. This story could have been silent. It could have been completely in black and white. It could have been any of the old tropes to make it like old cinema, and it would have worked perfectly fine. And I think you said it in the chat when we were talking to each other. I think you said something along the lines of, if you can say things without using words, then you may as well just not use words at all.
It's visual storytelling, and it's definitely my favorite kind of storytelling, and this was an absolute masterpiece. Yes, there is dialogue in there. Could they have made it in a way where there's no dialogue at all, or you only have the voice of Harrison's character himself when he's on stage? Possibly, but I think they still keep it very restricted itself, and it definitely works for the film for what we get. It's that slow, gradual, as you're slowly working it out, as you see those crowds dwindle and we see Liam Neeson's attitude change. Because like you at the beginning, he says that, I think he says that he found him on the streets of London or something like that, this poor boy with no arms or legs. He took him in. We see him feeding him. He's being very caring. And then as the episode goes on, I keep saying episode like it's a TV series. It could very easily be a TV series. I mean story, sorry. It is heartbreaking, and it is really depressing and hard-hitting at the end. To see essentially, and I mean, this stuff probably did go on. Like we see these kind of attractions or circus acts or freak shows, as they were called at the time. I almost got kind of like Elephant Man vibes from this at some moment.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But honestly, I mean, I think it'd be very difficult to stretch this out to a full-length feature film. You could probably stretch it out to the length of maybe an hour tops, where you get this story going, to build up that tension, to build up that rapport, to build up that relationship. But this one was probably the best paced episode.
Yeah, I agree.
It started off very kind of silent and very kind of everyone waiting for something to happen. Then you have Harrison's first kind of speech, where they go through a lot of the things that he says in his speeches. Then it cuts to almost like a montage of him going through his speeches to different crowds, to different audiences. And it shows how many times they actually went through this process and how deep into the mountains they actually got. And you didn't need them to kind of stop in every town and show the entire speech or show the aftermath of that. You just need to see little snippets, little kind of glimpses of it getting gradually and gradually worse. And the ending in itself it's horrifying. And because of that, it's fantastic. Like,
it's as you said, it's all done through facial expressions. The one moment where Liam Neeson goes to a brothel and like just sort of like awkwardly puts him on the floor.
Turns him away.
He's about to lay down with the whore, but he's like, "Oh, hang on 1 second," turns him around, but keeps him in the room. It is really horrible, disturbing stuff. And I think you said it as well when we were watching it. That ending smile from Liam Neeson.
It's almost it's somewhere between a comforting smile, like I'm not going to do anything to you, but we all know that it's something that you could depict there. There's so much you could talk about just that one smile. Was he smiling at the chicken? Was he smiling at him to comfort him? Because I think everyone knew what was going to happen there in that situation. Like, there was so much you can do from that just one little kind of look and smile. This episode was crazy for that. It had so much that you could kind of go into and talk about. Just from, I think the segment itself was 15-20 minutes long. It wasn't the shortest. It definitely wasn't the longest. But it had such rich storytelling. And I've seen people online saying that it's their least favorite story. And I say to those people, what the fuck were you watching? Because honestly, this is far from the weakest story. This is the strongest story, and probably my favorite out of all of them.
And I guess you can kind of tell, like, people watching at home, the amount of time that we talk about each episode is probably obviously how much is involved with it and how much we can talk about it. This is going to be very interesting when it comes to ranking them, because my ranking may change by the time that this review is all said and done. So stay tuned for that. We're going to move on to story 4 now, which is called All Gold Canyon. This is probably, I mean, I know that story 1, the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, was very light-hearted, but it still kind of had a very bittersweet ending to it. This one has more of an upbeat ending. I would liken this to maybe like an ending from The Shawshank Redemption. If this had a depressing ending, I think it would have really let the wind out of this episode, and it almost gets there, but it throws you for a loop at the very end, and it ends on a more uplifted note, which I think definitely helped this one, and possibly alleviate the tone from story number 3, Meal Ticket, a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. It is a bit more of a light-hearted episode, and that you can see that from the very first kind of moments where the cinematography in this one was absolutely stunning. Oh my god, phenomenal kind of landscape shots, shots with some really well done CGI that you kind of commented on, the deer that they used in it. We don't think it was a real deer, but it was very, very well CGI'd if that was the case.
Oh, do we have Tayte again?
The bottle episode. It happens just in one place. So basically, you have the prospector who is digging, looking for Mr. Pockets, which is his pocket of gold, which he will become rich off. You see him digging in many, many places, keep on going back to the river, digging some more, going back to the river, digging some more, going back to the river. And it gets to the stage where you realize he's been there for a very long time. And this man is old. It looks like he's coming to the end of his prospecting career. Looks like he's looking for one big score before he can go out on, almost in that sense. And it gets to the stage where he digs and digs and digs. He gets closer and closer and closer. And finally, he finds that pocket. He finds that vein of gold that will change his life. And then suddenly there's a shadow over his shoulder. And this is another moment from this where it's all done in the looks. And Tom Waits does an excellent job here. It isn't a full shadow you see. It's almost like a flicker of the wind. And you just see his face. And his face, it goes from complete happiness, just kind of that sunken. And you just see him. And he's not shaking his head like, no. He's just kind of like very, very slowly, like, I've worked for this for however long I've been here. And suddenly it's all going to be taken away from me. And this is where I pass it on to Chris.
Yeah, so I'm very torn on the ending of this particular episode, because I think that whilst I still very much enjoy the episode, and I just said that the ending is definitely earned, I think had you have ended it a couple of minutes before it did, how you initially think it's going to end, I think that would have had a much stronger message, a moral to the story. I don't know if this is a direct quote. I can't remember the quote exactly, but it talks about like God's Earth or something like that. And you are introduced to, this is definitely the most, in terms of cinematography, this is the most breathtaking and beautiful bit. Any kind of shot that you get of the prairies or the landscape of the Old West.
This was the quote at the start. And in all that mighty sweep of earth, he saw no sign of man, nor the handwork of man.
Yeah. But you are introduced to this very idyllic pasture, this forest, this land. You've got deer, you've got owls. It almost feels like it's a Bambi cartoon or something like that at the beginning. And then it's very interesting. Like as soon as he approaches, as soon as man approaches, they do some very creative things with it. Like you have the rippling stream, and it's almost like the water droplets themselves kind of scatter and flee from man. You have the butterflies flying away, the deer running away, the owl flying off, and then ultimately this land is kind of begun to be ruined. I thought he was going to start dynamiting and blowing up the landscape in order for this hunt for gold, but he is digging into the earth, and ultimately it is for that precious item of gold. And then right before the end of the episode where he is shot, it's almost like he's gone through all this strife, all this hard work of digging up, trying to find this, what he calls Mr. Pocket, which is this big gold deposit. And ultimately it was for nothing. And then I thought by the end of the episode, you're going to get this shot of the land, this one sort of like virgin, almost untouched land. And now it's been ruined by man. And I thought that was going to link into the theme. But it didn't quite go that way. I think that's definitely an element of it, but you're almost rooting for the guy by the end of it.
So he survives the shooting.
He does. I thought like infection in those times, any kind of shot. But I think you said that the bullet passes out of him, doesn't it? It doesn't hit anything.
Yeah, it does, yeah. So the bullet passes through him. He's able to, once again, another very brutal death, shoot the other guy in the face. Once again, go to Thanos' school of killing things. Always aim for the head, always. So we are then kind of left with this man who's bleeding out. He manages to fix himself up, and he leaves the valley with his gold and leaves the rest to the dead. So he buries the man in the gold vein pocket that he shot him in. And that's kind of where the story ends. And it's a nice kind of ending to the story. But for me, I feel like this might be my weakest one. It's not a bad story, once again. But when you compare it up against the other stories, there's a lot more to tell, a lot more to go into in the other stories. Tom Waits it's an excellent sort of performance by him. But maybe if there was something to bounce off, maybe if the person who shot him was there all along from the start, it would have possibly made a little bit more narrative sense, to have that partner who's kind of there with him, kind of hunting things with him and digging up with him, and then suddenly they find the gold vein pocket and he gets betrayed by him. That would have probably been a preferred story on my part, at least.
Yeah. I think I've said I did enjoy it, and I don't know how highly I would rank it, but it felt like a nice contained story, and I thought it was very interesting. However, they could have gone very much a darker, more depressing, more thought-provoking way with it, I think, than they actually did. But it was still a nice story, and it was a nice, almost palate cleanser after Eel Ticket. We're going to get into the next episode now. This is story number 5. This is The Gal Who Got Rattled, and this is without a doubt the longest story out of all of them. We've said that this one almost felt like a feature film, and I do think that with a little tweaking and a lot more padding, you could make this into a feature film if you wanted to.
I mean, this is the story of the Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
You have a brother and sister who are going to Oregon to basically find a new life. So he's getting a new business adventure. She's going to go there to get married. He dies on the way there. So she is kind of left following the trail on her own. She strikes up a reasonably good relationship with one of the people who are on the trail with her. She also has a dog, which was previous owner to the brother, President Pierce. Probably the best character in this entire episode. I'm joking.
The ultimate hero.
The ultimate hero of President Pierce, the dog. So there were a lot of elements to this episode, but personally for me, maybe it's the fact that all the other episodes were a little bit shorter, but this one, upon first watching, felt like it dragged on a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't a weak story. In fact, it's one of the stronger stories in a sense. It has a lot deeper kind of connection into the characters. It actually takes time to build that relationship up between, I want to get the names here, of the two people, Billy Knapp, and the second person was Alice Lonabor. So it actually builds up the relationship really well between them over time. I mean, you commented this when we were doing our kind of watch through of it. You were kind of asking, when's it going to pick up? When's the action going to come? When are we going to get kind of something to do with the story here? And it does happen towards the end in quite an interesting sequence involving the Native Americans kind of attacking Alice, who's gone off the trail with President Pierce to have a look at some prairie dogs. It was a very kind of interesting scene, which was done in waves. So I think you commented on this as well. You're wondering why they kept on coming back around in waves.
Yes, yeah, that was very strange to me in that ultimately the Native Americans had the stronger numbers. They were on horseback. They had the cavalry advantage to just two people who were armed, but one person who was very inexperienced with a weapon. Obviously, one guy with limited ammunition. I think very much Native Americans could have taken them.
First, Chris, the first wave was to see exactly how many people there were there, because there may be people there waiting to ambush. You never know. It also tells the lay of the land, kind of check out the scope, check out the landscape, see where they could run to if they needed to, see where they could attack from. On the second attack was the big one. The second attack was the main one. So our character of, I want to say his name is Mr. Arthur. The character of Mr. Arthur manages to kill the leader, only to be kind of attacked just afterwards by one of the people who stayed behind. Now, Alice is told at the very start of this fight, look, you're going to have to be strong here. If we get overrun, I'm going to have to shoot you. I'm going to have to kill myself. If I get killed, you're going to have to kill yourself on your own. So if I look like I'm going to go, you need to like pull the trigger. So the second where Mr. Arthur kind of gets attacked, he survives the attack. He actually manages to, he almost gets scalped, but he manages to shoot above him and kill the Native American. But Alice got spooked, Alice got rattled, and Alice shoots herself. And I believe the quote, I was going to say, the quote used at the end of the episode was,
no idea.
He had no idea.
Yeah, he had no idea what he would say to Billy Knapp. I loved the last 10 minutes of this episode. It very much made up for the rest. And I think you said it best in that this episode had to be the longest because it had to establish that relationship between Alice and Billy. And I absolutely agree with that. What I loved about the last 10 minutes, despite being very intense, very action-packed, and, you know, genuinely tension-filled, because putting myself in those shoes, that would be terrifying to see, just like however many riders it was, Native American riders, like running towards you. That would be really, really scary in that moment. In that you could have very easily written this to be almost like a Romeo and Juliet style story, a very heroic, romanticized romance, essentially. The last bit where you would have had Billy and Alice standing their ground, him being the archetypal hero, the masculine figure trying to defend his lady love. Ultimately, it isn't. It's the very quiet, stoic Mr. Arthur that we only see very vaguely throughout the episode, who ultimately becomes the hero, where he really stands up. I love how he plays this character in that he's scared himself. You can tell that he's ready to go out in a blaze of glory, but it's almost like, I guess you would have like an emergency service responder or something, an accident or something, where they're constantly talking to them. They're trying to make light of the situation and talking like everything's going to be okay. You're going to take this gun. He's very helpful and orchestrating her through what might happen, but he doesn't pull any punches by saying that, look, if things go wrong or I go down, here's a gun. You're going to shoot yourself. You're going to have to do that yourself. I loved his character in this moment, and seeing him go lone gunman on the Native Americans was really kind of badass.
I'd say the thing that hit the hardest on this story was the music towards the end.
Yeah,
the music throughout this entire film. You have obviously the musician in the first one of Buster Scruggs singing his songs, but the music really drives up in this one. It's the only one which really had kind of a memorable score to sorts. And you have it during the attack. You also have it when Mr. Arthur is walking back, and basically the shot fades into the picture, which is really kind of it. I mean, I said it was heartbreaking. It really is. And you could have extended the story. You really could have, because you could have had Billy Knapp then going over to. You could have had Billy Knapp going to the place, Oregon, where she was meant to marry anyway. The person would ask what happened to her on the trail, and he'd have to kind of explain to the person who she was meant to marry what actually happened to her. You also have the kind of little side plot of the money that was due on the brother's death that she had to deal with when she got to Oregon. So there was enough content in this one, at least, to definitely make a film of it, and it could have easily become a film from that. Shall we move on to the last one?
The last thing I'll say about this episode is that you very much get the sense at the end where, I won't say inherently he's sad. He's very disappointed that she's died at the end, but you get the impression that Mr. Arthur's seen this kind of thing before, and it is very much a case like, oh, that's a real shame. Yeah. Well, let's get her back and like bury her. You know, he is very much a, you know, he's been there, done that. You can tell that he's seen a lot of death on the plains before. He's probably done this journey many, many times. So he kind of gets on with it. It's all kind of like in a day's work for him in many ways. And then it does end on that kind of vaguely comedic line with, oh, he's no idea what he's going to say to Billy Knapp. You could infer that as a very sad thing. He doesn't know how he's going to break it to him, but I don't know. That's pretty much all I can say for episode 5. The next episode we're going to talk about now, which is the final story of the film, The Mortal Remains. This is probably easily the one that we can read into the most, probably along with episode 3. Certainly the one where a lot of people are going to have different interpretations of it and what they think it means. Whilst we've been doing this review, I've been kind of thinking about the film as a whole and specifically why the Coen brothers would have chose to end the film on this one. And I think I know a theme that definitely links all the episodes, or at least a common occurrence, which may seem very basic, which I'll talk about towards the last part of this review, and why I think that this is, on reflection, in terms of how much you can read into this episode, this one's probably one of my favorites.
This one, it is basically, this is what you'd expect from a standard Coen brothers film. This is the most Coen brothers kind of story. And it sounds like, with all Coen brothers film, it sounds like you're almost telling a joke at the very start of it. So an Englishman, an Irishman, a Frenchman, a lady, and a trapper all riding a stagecoach towards Fort Morgan.
Yeah.
And you almost expect that joke to be kind of solved at the end. But out of all the stories, possibly only Meal Ticket kind of compares in this way. This one has the eeriest kind of feel about it and the eeriest ending to it, at least.
Claustrophobic setting as well, in that it's pretty much the camera almost locks entirely inside the stagecoach.
The entire kind of, this entire story isn't kind of action driven like all of the others. There isn't like a big set piece that will kind of define it. It is just people telling stories. And every single character almost has a story to tell. You start off with the two undertakers kind of talking about kind of their recent trip and the person who they've killed, who's sitting on top of the stagecoach. You then have the trapper who wants to kind of talk in about himself and his affairs with life. You then have the lady chipping in with how she is of a higher class of the others and how her high life society has served her in her time. Then you have the
oh, hello, Tayte.
And I feel like the episode all comes into a massive culmination with what might be probably the best speech or best words said in this film, which is the bounty hunter's the Midnight Caller speech, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so at the very beginning, we know that these two guys, I think it's Thigpen and Clarence, are cargo. And it's very, very ambiguous at the beginning what that cargo is. But as the episode goes on, it almost becomes... they talk about the stagecoach driver as well. And when the lady takes a particular turn, they're saying, like, stop the coach, stop the coach. And he says that the coachman doesn't stop for anything. He constantly keeps going. He's on a schedule. He doesn't stop. And it does almost create this very otherworldly quality to it. The speech at the very end of the episode is very intense, and like the people in that carriage, you are transfixed by it. They talk about that one of the characters distracts their victims or their bounties, and then one person comes thumping and then ultimately delivers the killing blow, and that they love, what is it? They love, they talk about how people...
The way they look, yeah. The way they look when they suddenly realize they're about to die. Or the way they look as they're laying on the floor dying.
There we go. The expression in their eyes as they negotiate the passage and try to make sense of it is what it's quoted as in the episode.
And then I think the lady asked the sense of it, and he said, "How would I know? I'm still alive.
Yeah,
I'll live forever." And it's just like, oh, that's creepy. That's real. That's almost threatening. It's almost said like a threat, and it does kind of come to mind because when I was first writing the story, I was thinking, they're on this stagecoach, right? Are they on there to kill someone?
Yeah.
Like that did creep into the back of my mind, because he says one person distracts, and then he started distracting them with the bang, bang, bang story.
Yeah.
All I was thinking was, please tell me there's like a slightly wider shot where you can see what the other person was doing, what Clarence was doing, or whether he was just kind of staring straight at them.
And in those moments, they did seem very psychopathic, very sociopathic, and like they do. Well, he even says like he takes enjoyment in it, and his entire demeanor, his entire character changes in that moment. At the beginning, he's very cordial, he's very gentlemanly, very well spoken, and then in this moment, his eyes and expression change to almost this hollow thing, like there's nothing inside him. This very, very eerie characterization of him. Also, you've got Brendan Gleeson as well, who does that song, and you could think that that's a very inspired moment, that he just did that either to calm the lady who was just having a panic attack, but then the guy to his left, who's like his partner in crime, says like, oh, he does that every time. So you think that it's completely staged, it's an act they put on. And in that moment I thought, are these two serial killers? And they talk about ferrying cargo, and the 3 people in the carriage are the cargo, and they're going to kill them at any moment. And it's even where the episode ends, like that could entirely be the eventuality. We don't know the fates of the 3 people, and they're all very apprehensive to go into this very what's his name, Norman Bates style hotel almost at the very end of the episode.
So something that I always noticed from that kind of that final part of the episode, it's kind of the fact that no one wants to leave the carriage. No one then wants to go into the hotel. No one wants to be the first one in, because these 2 people have scared them so hard to their soul, they wouldn't want to spend a night with them, like in a confined space, because they've only spent maybe however long in this confined space with them there on the stagecoach. They don't want to spend a single more minute with them. They'd rather get as far away as possible. And it's almost like each of the 3 characters outside of the 2 have almost been put in their place. They kind of almost feel like they've been threatened, and they're backing down off that, and they don't want anything to do with the other 2.
I think we're looking at this very literally, though, and I do think you can look at this episode very literally on surface value, as we've just done and we've just discussed. However, I think that this episode is very much a metaphor of ferrying souls to the next life. The stagecoach driver himself, they talk about, is this entity that doesn't stop, is this unstoppable coachman that is transporting people to their location. Feels very much like in Greek mythology, like Charon, who was the ferryman that ferried the souls of the dead to the underworld. Even the hotel at the end, I read somewhere that on the outside of the door, there's a demon and an angel above the doorway. And I think you could maybe symbolize that hotel is a kind of waiting room for lost souls, maybe, or something like that. I do think
are they the souls of the dead? Have they gone and died?
Are they the Grim Reaper? They talk about collecting bounties and ferrying cargo. Are they the Grim Reaper? Are they the incarnation?
The stagecoach driver does not stop. There is you could take it on face value. There is so many different metaphors you can give for this one, and that leaves you with almost a larger sense of dread. Yeah, because even they start to question whether they're alive or not.
And you talked about them being apprehensive to leave the coach and to go into this. Maybe it's a kind of purgatory. Who knows? We are reading very much into this, but I think that all those signs are definitely there, and I think it is meant to be interpreted in that way. And thinking about that, and as we were talking about the other episodes, I was thinking ahead to this one. I was thinking, what is the purpose of putting this particular story at the end? Because they talked about that the Coen brothers thought very, very hard about which episodes would follow which and the structure of the film.
Yeah,
I was trying to think of a common theme between all the episodes, because all the episodes are very, very different, different tones and everything like that. But the one thing that happens in all of them is death. People die, whether it's the main character or a side character.
Yeah.
Under all different circumstances. The first story, the second story even, is very light-hearted. Some are much more hard-hitting and impactful, like Meal Ticket, for example, or The Gal Who Got Rattled. The one thing that happens in all of them, apart from this one directly, there is a dead body in this episode, but we don't see anyone die on camera. Sense of death and mortality. And I think it's quite poignant to end, well, not poignant, that's not the right word, thought-provoking to end the film on this particular one, which could be interpreted as an allegory, as a metaphor for, death or, you know, transporting people to the underworld or purgatory or the next life or whatever it happens to be. Because death ultimately is inescapable in this film, as we see.
Completely.
Whether people are backstabbed or just rotten bad luck, it kind of comes for everyone. And I don't know if that's what the Coen brothers were intending when they made this film. That's what I took away from it, from this particular ending episode. But yeah, so having talked about that, and I knew that we were going to go in depth into this particular episode, that is definitely going to change my ranking when it comes to it, because that
Interesting.
might up a little bit more.
So I guess we should go through what our favorites are from sixth to first. What do you have as your number 6, Chris?
I have Near Algodones as my number 6. Don't get me wrong, there wasn't any inherently bad story in this film. I did enjoy them all. However, especially discussing it now, I didn't feel like there was inherently much we could talk about from it. It is kind of a fun little vignette, but it wasn't as stylized as episode 1, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, and it didn't really have as much impact on me and was mostly forgettable, apart from Pan Shot, which was fantastic.
I had All Gold Canyon as my number 6. I love the cinematography, but I feel like there could have been a little bit more, and the ending kind of, there could have been more done in this one. At number 5, I had The Girl Who Got Rattled.
My number 5 is The Girl Who Got Rattled. So I think our 4 and 5 are pretty much going to be our 5s and 6s or whatever it was are going to be switched. I still very much enjoy this, but it didn't pick up until the last 10 minutes. I knew that it had to be longer to establish everything, but there were episodes earlier on, mostly Meal Ticket, that does establish some kind of connection or relationship between characters in a much shorter time frame, and I think you could have done that as well. However, I did really like the ending. The action scene was intense, but I think there's more that we drew from other episodes than that one, so that's going to be my number 5.
Yeah, so I then have Near Algodones, and you must have All Gold Canyon.
All Gold Canyon's my number 4. Yeah. I still very much enjoy this, and I talked about defending the end. However, I did offer some potentially more thought-provoking ideas that they could have brought to it based on the material. However, this, out of all of them, was definitely the most beautiful to look at. Any kind of landscape shot in the Old West or the American West, whatever. And it was beautifully captured with the cinematography, but it is going to be my number 4.
So this is interesting, because for my number 2 and 3, I could have swapped them around multiple times.
Yeah.
I went with Mortal Remains being my number 3.
That's also my number 3 as well. I like symbolism. I love symbolism surrounding that kind of stuff. And I thought, I said as well when we did our group chat when we were watching it, that the writing absolutely burned off the page. The Fur Trapper was hilarious. The characters and the personalities were brilliant. And the ending monologue was very intense and chilling. But there are two periods.
A better film than The Hateful Eight?
Yeah, it may even be a better film than The Hateful Eight.
I'm going to go ahead and guess it now. That must mean The Ballad of Buster Scruggs is number 2, Chris.
Oh, see, this is very difficult, and this is where I might switch them round. There is definitely more artistic merit in Meal Ticket and is more hard-hitting and impactful, but the one that I had the most fun with and the one that I'm going to remember mostly is going to be The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. So number 2 is going to be Meal Ticket. Beautiful visual storytelling, fantastic chilling performances from Liam Neeson, and I forgot his name again, please.
Harry Melling.
Harry Melling. Beautiful performances, very impactful, and is inherently probably the best story out of all of them, and definitely the most well made. But I had more fun with the other one, and everyone knows my number 1 is The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. The title of the film itself, very fun, very light-hearted, very creative visually, and definitely brought in a lot of tropes from westerns, but had a lot of fun with it. And that is the introductory story, so that's going to be my number 1 as well.
So I would have gone with Buster Scruggs at number 2. Yeah. I think it's a brilliant opening. It's very lighthearted. I love the 4/4 breaking. It's done very well. You get involved with the character. You get involved with the songs. And it has a very kind of bittersweet ending to it, which, of course, we all know. On this channel, we love bittersweet endings.
We do. We really do.
I mean, this film has so many bittersweet endings that we almost feel spoiled. But number 1 is the bitterest of all endings. It is Meal Ticket. This film is this single story is phenomenal. It's an absolute masterpiece. If they had that as a short story in the Oscars, it would win outright. Like, honestly, this film does so much with so little information. And it's a very kind of great satire upon modern media, you could say, with the chicken being the more entertaining thing and the thing that draws in the crowds instead of the person who actually puts in the effort.
Yeah.
You could read into this episode so much. Like, I think it's got the most potential to read into. It has the best ending, I'd say, out of all of them. It's just amazing. It's phenomenal.
I do feel like my number 1 and 2 picks will be interchangeable any day of the week. It really depends what you're looking for in an episode, and I completely agree with that. Like, you know, I could have easily have put Meal Ticket in my number 1 as well. Definitely has more to talk about, but yeah, this closing.
I guess we go with the Chris. Are you going to watch this again?
You know what? I might actually watch this again. This will be something that I feel like I will recommend to people to watch if they have Netflix, even if they haven't seen a Coen Brothers movie before. I still think there's a lot to like in this one. If you don't like all the stories inherently, there will be a story or a collection of stories in there that you will connect with or that you'll have fun with. So I would absolutely recommend this movie. As I said, it's on Netflix. It's easily available. Please go and check it out. If you've only heard about it, because I only heard about it from you, I didn't see any trailer or anything like that. So I don't think this is going to be well known. I think that the only reason people are going to watch this is if they are already a Coen Brothers fan and know of their work and follow their work.
I guess if you're on Netflix because they've been posting it on the main screen,
or if you just do like a blind watch on Netflix and just go, oh, I'm curious, and you know, put that on, you might have fun with it. I would absolutely recommend it, and yeah, I'm thank you for recommending it to me. As I said, like this,
you're welcome, Chris.
This could have been a very different review, and then I would have had the whole thing spoiled. I would have missed out on this experience of watching this film. So I'm very glad that I watched it this morning. But I think I've pretty much said everything I can on the Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Have you?
Yeah, I'm completely done with it. Go watch this film. It's phenomenal. It will probably end up on my top 5.
You know what? This might feature on my top 5 as well, but the year is not over yet. We still have a month and a half.
No, it is not. Well, Chris, I've only got a month, so
this is true.
Or less than that. Less than that.
Not to live, thank God.
Like, no, not to live. Thank God for that. No.
Very morbid. I've only got a month.
I am trying to get as many of this year's films watched before I leave, but there are some films which will slip through the cracks. For example, Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah.
That's the only one I can name off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's other releases coming out in December, like Mary Poppins Returns.
And you've talked about some movies that came out earlier this year that even I missed as well. So maybe before you go, we'll both kind of a similar review to this, how we've done it, how we'll both go and watch it quickly and give like maybe a shorter review, or watch a bunch of them and a collection of shorter reviews.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that'll do it for our review on the Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of this film. Have you seen it? Did you like it? Didn't you like it? Please go and support this movie. And obviously, please drop us a comment, anything related to this or indeed the Coen Brothers movies that they've made so far. We have many other shows planned. I am planning to go live. Well, not live tomorrow, sorry. Oh, go on, sorry. Yep. Tayte, hello. Are you there? We seem to have lost it again. There we go.
I don't know if we're losing me or losing you, but one of us got lost. But anyway, I guess you were closing off, so I'll say goodbye. Thanks for watching. Social media and stuff like that, and go watch Buster Scruggs.
Yeah, all our social media links are in the bottom, and yeah, see you guys. See you on the next video.